Characters. So the main character of my novel that reminds me is called K, and he's essentially an alter ego for myself. Now, I gave him the name of K, not because I wanted to pay homage to Franz Kafka or J.M. Coetzee, but it's because in Ghanaian culture, in Ashanti culture, children's names are based on the day of the week that they're born. And for the boys, 6 of the 7 names begin with K. So you've got Kojo, you've got Kofi, you've got Kwabena, you've got Kweku, you've got Kwesi, and you've got Kwame. And so that's why he's called K, because I wanted to make him kind of like an everyman. Also because I feel that naming a character, sometimes you import all of the connotations that a reader has in their minds on that name. So I hate naming my characters. It's something that I'm probably never going to do, just because it just gives too much power to the reader to twist the intention that I have for the character. They just able to imagine too much. And again, so, debut novels tend to focus on the author's life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Ian McEwan said that, Milan Kundera said that your first few novels before you turn 40 are literally you just pillaging your life and turning it into fiction. That's absolutely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I also think, why stop there anyway? Why stop when you get you can continue doing that, all through your life. Marcel Proust literally wrote his entire life. He essentially wrote a memoir, I believe, in 7 books and called it a novel, called it, a novel sequence, and people were okay with that. And that book has obviously gone down as one of the greatest achievements in Western literature. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I think that there's a little bit of snobbery when people say, debut writers tend to focus too much on their personal lives because they somehow think that it means they lack imagination or something, which is absolutely not true, because give a pen and paper to anybody, they're not going to be able to just write down their life. And of course, there's fictional elements. Fiction is part of it. It is fiction. So it's not easy to do, whether you're using your own life or somebody else's. You still have to do the research. As I said above, I'm Ghanaian. I still had to do a lot of research on Ghanaian culture. I have borderline personality disorder. I still had to do a lot of reading on that. So it's still as respectable as somebody who's written something that's seemingly far removed from their own lives. And I do think that when you write about yourself in that kind of way as well, you challenge yourself, you learn things about yourself. It becomes a different kind of experience. You're not just writing for your readers, you're writing to understand something that's happened to you in your life. And that's important, because then the reader goes on that journey with you, and it just becomes a more fulfilling experience when they're reading the book. Also, I think that it's important to remember the way people speak, and that just because somebody has said something in real life doesn't mean it's going to translate well onto the page. A lot of times I've spoken to younger writers who've written a short story, and I've said, maybe this bit of dialogue doesn't sound realistic. And they say, but it actually happened. So what? It doesn't matter. Not everything that happens in real life translates well onto the page, because real life is real life. Nobody says something to you in real life and you say, that doesn't really sound authentic. You might think in your head, are they lying to me, or why have they said that, so on and so forth. But you don't get the same thought when you're reading a line of dialogue on the page that just doesn't land very well, whether it's been said in real life or not. So this brings me to voice, which is probably one of the hardest bits when it comes to writing a novel, because you could have some amazing descriptions, amazing, beautiful, poetic prose, and then a character opens their mouth and it just doesn't make sense. It feels like there's a disconnection between the tone that's coming out of their mouth and the actual character that you've written and created. There's no easy way to do this. The way I did it, I sat and literally tried to become the character that I was writing. So it's almost kind of like method acting for authors, I guess, because you really just try and become that person and then write. But not everybody can do that, and not everybody's comfortable doing that. I think that the way to really capture voice is to just ask yourself realistic questions about what's happening in that person's life. So how would this person that I've given these attributes, I know what the attributes are in my head, how would they react to this thing happening? What would they say when this thing actually happened? If you start asking yourself those questions, then the voice will become, I don't want to use the word authentic, but a lot more believable on the page. Music is also very important, and music can really help you maintain a voice and a tone. So I used to listen to a lot of songs before I would even start writing. You know, anybody who's read That Reminds Me knows that the tone can be quite melancholic sometimes. So it won't surprise anybody to know that, you know, the songs that I was listening to before I would start writing were Gary Jules's Mad World and Black's Wonderful Life. I had those songs on repeat. And then when I needed to change into maybe a more positive kind of vibe, I would listen to a song called Optimistic by Sounds of Blackness, which is probably the most uplifting song I've ever heard in my life. And that would help me maintain it, you know, just sticking with those songs. And it's interesting because I can't listen to those songs anymore now because they just drive me insane. But when you're writing the novel, I think those things can actually help. Another way for you to really get to know your character, and this is something that I did, I can't remember where I got the idea from or whether I thought of it myself, but it's literally write a eulogy for your main character. Think about them as being dead already. Then you will want to have more of an insight into their life because this person is dead. You want to do them justice. You want to bring them back to life. So do that. I mean, it will probably bring out elements of a character that you didn't even realize were there. When you put a character in different situations, or when you think about them as being dead, you want to know, what is their life? What was their life? What were they like? What happened? All those kind of things. You start asking yourself those kind of questions. So yeah, write a eulogy for your main character. You can write for all of your characters, side characters, sub characters. But I would say you need to really know your main character because every other side character, depending on whether they interact with your main character, I should say, actually, their personality or identity will be based on the main character. And then finally, how does your character look? What do they look like? What are their physical attributes? Now, me as a writer, I never like to describe what my character looks like. That's just a taste thing. I don't think it matters unless it's really integral to the story. I think you should be able to get to know a character and care about them and understand them without knowing what they look like. It's not important at all. But if you do want to describe a character, the first thing I will say to you, and any person who teaches creative writing will tell you, don't have your character look in a mirror in order to describe what they look like. It's lazy, it's boring, and everybody's done it before. Milan Kundera has done it to death, and it's so boring, and it just doesn't really tell you anything about the person except that they're critical of the way that they look. Which again, if it's integral to the story, fine. But if not, it's boring. Everybody's critical of the way they look, no matter how they look. You don't need to get them standing in front of a mirror in order to get that across. So avoid mirrors at all costs if you want to describe the way your character looks. And don't try and find ways around it by have them look in a puddle or something like that. It's the same thing. What they look like is at the bottom of the list of things that are important about a person. And I think we should carry that over into the novels we write. A lot of the time when an author is describing a character, the only thing that's happening is suddenly your brain goes into movie mode and you're just trying to visualize everything that, the way the character looks, which is fine, but at the end of the day, a novel shouldn't be like a cheap trip to the cinema. It should be more than that. It should be an accumulated effect of how a person comes across to the reader. It shouldn't be dumped on them, they look like this, because it's just, I think that's how I see names as well. When you give a character a name, it adds to a character elements that are just not important for the progression of the story, unless those things are central to the story.